Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was a bright spot for Judaism in America. One of the past century's great theologians, rabbis, and activists. If you have heard of Rabbi Heschel, it is likely because of his involvement with the civil rights movement. Of course, Rabbi Heschel had a long and distinguished career of public engagement and social commentary, but often his career is epitomized by a summary moment. Not even 30 years after the destruction of Eastern European Jewry, at a time rife with uncertainty about Jewish life in the United States, Rabbi Heschel had plenty of topics apt for engagement in activism. Most of those topics lived inside the spectrum of Jewish life in America. There was the changing nature of synagogues as they moved from the city center to the suburbs. There was an active and critical conversation about egalitarianism, its limits, its opportunities. And of course, plenty of potent conversation about the ideology of movements and the religious ideas of the day. In one way or another, Rabbi Heschel commented and was involved in all of these critical topics. But those comments are not what he is most widely known for. In the 60s, Rabbi Heschel was friends with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King called Heschel a truly great prophet. Over many years, they developed love and respect and common cause for each other through speaking engagements, opportunities in public to publicly demonstrate their shared values. The relationship was strong enough that when Dr. King called for religious leaders to join the Selma to Montgomery March for Voting Rights, Heschel received a personal invitation. The march took place as tensions in Alabama ran high. Many of us have seen the photographs of Rabbi Heschel marching alongside Dr. King. In the most famous image, you can see soon-to-be Representative John Lewis, Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, an unidentified nun, among others, walking arm in arm across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Later, when writing about his actions that day, Rabbi Heschel would say, "When I marched in Selma, my feet were praying." That's the type of quote a progressive synagogue would print on a banner and walk behind during a Martin Luther King Day Jr. parade today. That Heschel walked with King in Selma is the foundation for all sorts of activism and engagement in present-day American Jewish life. But curiously, an aspect of this story is often overlooked, or maybe forgotten, or perhaps ignored. Similar to Tulsa, Montgomery, Alabama had a small but vibrant Jewish community. The local Jews had their own complicated relationships with the city they lived in, with the local civil rights efforts, and the essential questions of their day. They owned businesses. They worked in the courthouses. They sent their kids to the public schools. They had plenty of interest and involvement in what was happening in their own backyard. So, it is said that when Heschel went with a delegation of rabbis to Alabama for this moment of activism, the outsiders were met at the airport by the local rabbis. The local rabbis said, "Please turn around and go home, because you're about to make life really difficult for us. We understand where your sympathies are. We might agree with those sympathies, but we have to live in this reality. You're going to cause massive anti-Semitism. We are going to be the victims of it." Despite their pleas, Heschel's sense of the moment, Heschel's sense that this moment called for audacious and optimistic action triumphed. The greater gesture prevailed. But the story is important. There was a difference between the perspective of the local community and the famous outsider. They didn't want that bright spot to shine in their direction. I wonder what would have happened had Dr. King's march not been from Selma to Montgomery, but from Owasso to Tulsa instead. How would our Jewish community have felt about an outside activist descending upon us with a sense of what was necessary for a broader public moment? What would we have said if the bright light had been turned in our direction? It's impossible to know exactly what anyone else would ever do. But I have a sense of how this community understood itself from the very beginning. And I think that can be instructive to us in answering this question. As we've examined throughout these high holidays, we have a critical document from our founders. It was left in a time capsule for us to discover. Our founders wrote a letter that voiced their hopes and voiced their concerns. There are no perfect answers to the questions they raise. However, in that letter, they communicate something that I think is absolutely essential to B'nai Emunah then and absolutely essential to B'nai Emunah now. And I think this might help us understand how those who came before us would have responded to Heschel's bright light. Of their vision for this congregation, our founders write, with the sincere and earnest hope of having laid the foundation of a true Judaism that would someday be looked upon as a bright spot of Judaism in America. I know how some of you hear that line. How silly were they? How could they possibly have imagined Tulsa, Oklahoma as a bright spot of Judaism in America? But let me remind you, they were writing those words in 1916. That same year, a Jewish boy from Louisville, Kentucky, would become the first Jew nominated to serve on the United States Supreme Court. Yes, Louis Brandeis was from Kentucky. It was a moment where anything was possible. And so, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised to hear from our ancestors, to hear that our ancestors envision Tulsa, Oklahoma as a bright spot for Judaism in America. For them, the question may more obviously have been, why not Tulsa? They cared a lot about this place. They felt lucky to be here. And they wanted Judaism to exist here for a very long time. But they were not content with merely existing. The message they were communicating then, and a message for us to consider now, is this. To perpetuate Judaism, we must be audacious and optimistic. We must see ourselves as a bright spot for Judaism in America. Of course, we must understand what it means to perpetuate Judaism first in order to do any of this. On Rosh Hashanah, we spoke about the shifts in Jewish life, away from ideology and towards relationships. All of this means that definitions of Jewish life are changing as well. We might think that this means we are in a unique moment, a uniquely dynamic moment. But it's worth noting the Jewish community of 1916 was plenty dynamic as well. Here are just a few examples. Justice Louis Brandeis, he grew up in a Frankist household. His parents had immigrated from present-day Czech Republic to Louisville and practiced a form of Judaism that centered on a false messianic figure who had been dead for decades. Want to know more about it? Read the books of Jacob. In 1916, for nearly 20 years, Max Nordau had been speaking about Musculjudentum, muscular Judaism, which argued that Jewish culture and religion should direct its adherents to reach for certain moral and corporeal ideals, which through discipline, agility, and strength would result in a stronger, more physically assured Jew. This starkly contrasted and was intentionally antagonistic towards the long-held stereotype of the weak, intellectually sustained Jew. In 1916, a Jewish woman, Margaret Sanger, opened the first birth control clinic in the United States, which led to her arrest for distributing contraception. While I'll admit she was a complicated figure, her activism at this time advocated for women to have a more equal footing in society. And the organization she founded would evolve into something we know today as Planned Parenthood. Jews then, as they are now, were diverse, multifaceted, and dynamic, an ethical and moral community with thousands of years of history. The Jewish community's representation of diversity and the minority experience has been an important part of every society we have ever been a part of. For some of us, Judaism is our heritage. For others of us, it's our spiritual home, which we've claimed as our own. Judaism then, as it is now, is not perfect. It is not some flawless form of way back when old-timey traditionalism. It was home then, and it is home now. It presents us with values and a way of living in this world that can ground everything we do, from putting our shoes on in the morning to go to bed at night. Judaism has something to say. Judaism then, as I believe Judaism now, is most certainly worth perpetuating. Yet audaciousness and optimism do not necessarily come easy. We have a tendency in religion towards timidity, conservatism, modesty, and humility. We hold back from taking bold risks because we want to preserve what came before us. We don't want to lose touch with essential qualities that shaped our foundational experiences. We have self-doubt and uncertainty about our authority or our creativity or our ability relative to those who came before us. They were smarter. They were more traditional. They knew more than I could have. So how could I reinvent myself? How could I reinvent what they gave me? Sometimes we simply have other concerns that take energy and attention away from our shared heritage. We invest our creative energy into our businesses, our philanthropy, our families, our friends, not our Judaism. None of this is bad, but it draws attention away from what might be possible. We can be tempted to be pessimistic about religion. We look around the room or read a Pew study and we think to ourselves it's safer to have low expectations. Why should we work countless hours into the night if there will be no reward? Perhaps we've already experienced loss or failure. We don't want to go through those feelings again. Maybe we're unsure if there will be a next generation of leaders with whom we can share the burden we have carried for so long. And so, it becomes difficult to be optimistic. It becomes easier to tell a story of contraction, consolidation, failure for factors beyond our control. The sages of this Mishnah knew these feelings as well. They have an idea about how we should feel about timidity and inaction. In the ethics of our ancestors, Pirkei Avot, we are taught, V'lo haybaishan lamed. A timid person cannot learn. Narrowly, this means a person who is too timid to admit what they don't know cannot learn. They can't even ask a question of their teacher. But this also means we should be wary of our own timidness, as it will keep us from learning. Timidity, shyness, pessimism, and uncertainty inevitably lead to stunted growth, a failure to learn and develop and flourish. But importantly, the same Mishnah adds the following: "Uv'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel liot ish." In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. No, this is not some be a man hypermasculinity statement. This text means something else. This text means that where there is no one else to take initiative and assume responsibility, a person should take leadership upon themselves. This person is not considered haughty, but responsible. In a place where there is no one else to be responsible, strive to be the one who is responsible. So our tradition teaches that we have to take responsibility, especially in moments when there is no one else to do so. And if we desire growth and learning, we need to actively counteract our pessimistic tendencies. And if the anxieties of our ancestors have taught us anything, it's that we constantly worry Judaism won't make it to the next generation on its own. We have to be active parts of that story. Sure, Judaism won't disappear overnight if any one or another of us walks away from the project. It's America. We can all do whatever we want. But doing whatever we want also has consequences. If we do not take responsibility for shaping and perpetuating the next generation of Jewish life, then someone else may, or everyone might end up walking away. That's why we need to perpetuate Judaism with audacious actions and unrelenting optimism. Our ancestors had an idea that fits the bill. Jewish life in Tulsa, Oklahoma can be a bright spot for Judaism in America. Now, I am not making some bold Tulsa-Jerusalem argument to hesitantly borrow a poorly constructed portmanteau. There can and will be many bright spots in the Jewish world. But Tulsa, Oklahoma should always be part of the conversation. Our Judaism is not lesser or weaker or more marginal than any other form of Judaism in the world. In Tulsa, we enacted Judaism that responds to and incorporates our reality. We sing and we bake. We cure pastrami and we study traditional Jewish texts. We advocate for inclusion and we resettle refugees. We run the best preschool in the city and are constantly looking towards innovation and improvement and new ideas that will shape not only our future, but the future of the whole Jewish world. Based on early feedback, I have high hopes for our new 5-day-a-week aftercare program here at the synagogue. Sometimes we must do all of this while raising a voice above the naysayers who express skepticism and doubt because they are stuck in their own inability to see what is possible. We can do anything we want, not only because of resources, although those are certainly significant and help tremendously, but because we believe in the possibility of this place, and we know the potential is immense. Not because Tulsa is better than anywhere else, but because every place deserves the type of ambition and optimism that I am speaking of this morning. That's how we will all build for a better world. Our founders wanted this of us. They told us so in a letter. Depending on how closely you choose to read that document, we have succeeded and failed. But successes and failures are the inevitable byproduct of the ambition and optimism I speak of this morning. And we too are worthy of a letter, not only of one to read or discover, but we are worthy authors of a letter as well. The way I see it, our task in 784 is to write a letter for the next century, for the decades of Tulsa Jews who will come after us. It is a letter we will have to write collectively. And it is also a letter which we must write individually, because all of us will have descendants. Judaism will be part of that legacy we leave. We might break barriers like Louis Brandeis. We might envision new forms of identity like Max Nordau. We might create lasting forms of activism like Margaret Sanger. Those who come next need to know what we might hope of them. And inevitably, those future generations will both succeed and fail. If in 100 years from now, our descendants are grappling with what we've said in these moments, we'll know that despite small obstacles and disappointments, we will have succeeded. I have a sense of how we'd react if Rabbi Heschel arrived in Tulsa, shining his bright spot as he did in Alabama those many years ago. We'd strive to be a bright spot for Judaism in America too. We'd admire his ambition, his audacity, and his optimism, but critically, we wouldn't have needed an outside voice to prompt us into action. We would have been leading the march already. To be a bright spot for Judaism in America is to be integral in shaping a voice not only for our city, but for the whole Jewish world. Our founders wanted this of us. We should want this of us. We should want this of ourselves. And to make that vision a reality, we must write a similar letter for our future, both as individuals and as part of a collective. That is our holy task for this Yom Kippur. That is our holy task for this year ahead. On this day of solemn atonement, at the dawn of a new year, may we listen to the voices of our ancestors as though they are the voice of God. May we build networks of relationships that strengthen our diversity and redefine our Judaism. May we refound, retrace, and rebuild ourselves as we confront inevitable obstacles of our lives. And may we be audacious and optimistic in continuing to build our home, Tulsa, Oklahoma, into a bright spot for Judaism in America. So may this be the will of the living God. Together let us say, Amen.